The corridors of Seattle General Hospital were quiet that night, the kind of stillness that pressed down on the shoulders of those who walked them. Rain tapped steadily against the wide windows of the cardiac ward, the sound a muted metronome for the machines humming inside. Sophia Carter adjusted the strap of her mask and moved toward the room at the end of the hall, scanning the nameplate as she did. Her breath caught when she read it. Margaret Carter. It had been years since she'd spoken that name aloud. The woman inside the room was not just another patient. She was her former mother-in-law. Once, Margaret had been a figure of power, unyielding, domineering, with words sharp enough to cut through bone. To Sophia, she had been nothing short of an adversary, someone who made her feel like an intruder in her own marriage. And now, fate had placed them here, in this sterile room filled with the antiseptic tang of disinfectant and the faint, mechanical rhythm of a heart monitor. Sophia paused at the door, forcing her hands to stay steady. She was a nurse. She was here to do her job. Whatever history they shared, whatever scars still ached beneath the surface, she would set them aside. Slowly, she pushed the door open. Margaret lay in the bed, her once imposing figure reduced to fragile lines beneath hospital sheets. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her chest rose and fell in shallow motions. A mask fed her oxygen, though it seemed to do little against the weakness that clung to her body. When Margaret's eyes opened and landed on Sophia, something unexpected flickered there. Not disdain, not the cold superiority Sophia remembered so well, but something softer, fear, perhaps, or resignation. The older woman's lips trembled, her hand twitching against the blanket as though reaching for something unseen. Sophia! The name came out hoarse, broken, almost reverent. The sound sent a shiver down Sophia's spine. Never, not once during the years of her marriage, had Margaret spoken her name like that. She had called her many things, most of them cruel, dismissive. But never Sophia, never with that fragile tenderness. "You should rest," Sophia said quietly, keeping her voice professional. "Don't strain yourself." But Margaret shook her head weakly, her breathing labored. "No, I have to tell you. There's something you must know. I can't leave this world without saying it." Sophia's heart clenched. She wanted to dismiss it, to believe that the woman was simply delirious, lost in the haze of medication and the looming shadow of mortality. But there was something urgent in Margaret's tone, something that clawed its way past the years of bitterness and demanded attention. Margaret's hand lifted shakily, reaching toward her. For a moment, Sophia hesitated, then stepped forward and wrapped her own fingers around the frail, papery skin. The grip was surprisingly strong, as though the older woman was anchoring herself to life by clinging to Sophia's hand. "I was wrong," Margaret whispered, her voice breaking. "I was wrong about so many things about you." The words struck Sophia harder than she expected. A rush of memories, Margaret's disdainful glances, her biting remarks, the endless ways she'd made her feel unwanted, collided with the vulnerability of the moment. It was disorienting to see her reduced to this fragile state, confessing regrets like a penitent soul before the final judgment. "You don't have to do this," Sophia murmured, though her throat was tight. "Yes, I do." Margaret's eyes glistened. "You deserve the truth, even if you hate me for it, even if it destroys you." Sophia's pulse quickened. What truth? The monitor beside the bed beeped steadily, but each sound felt heavier now, as though counting down to something inevitable. Margaret's chest rose with effort, and she let out a breath that rattled in her lungs. "It wasn't the doctors who decided that surgery," she said, her voice trembling. "It wasn't because of medical need." Sophia froze, her breath caught in her chest. She had lived with that scar, both on her body and her soul, believing it had been necessary, believing that fate had been cruel but unavoidable. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Margaret's gaze locked onto hers, unwavering despite the weakness pulling at her. The chart was altered. the decision forced. You weren't meant to be cut open that night. It was done for reasons that had nothing to do with your health or your child's. The room seemed to shrink around Sophia, the walls closing in as the words sank into her. Her stomach twisted, her mind racing back to that night, to the confusion, the helplessness, the sudden announcement that her child hadn't survived. Margaret's grip on her hand tightened. "There's more," she said, her voice growing urgent, desperate. "But you have to promise you'll listen. You'll hear it all." Sophia could only stare at her, her body trembling, the air heavy with the weight of what was about to come. The heart monitor beeped again, steady and relentless. Margaret drew in a ragged breath, and then, with eyes wide and wet, she prepared to reveal the secret that had haunted them both for years. The silence in the room thickened until Sophia thought she could hear the blood rushing in her ears. Margaret's words still hung in the air, unshakable, undeniable. Her mind recoiled, refusing to believe them, yet her heart hammered with the terrifying certainty that they were true. "You need to understand," Margaret whispered, forcing each syllable past her failing breath. "Your daughter, she didn't die." The world seemed to tilt. Sophia's knees weakened, and for a moment she thought she might collapse to the cold linoleum floor. Every nerve in her body screamed against the words. They couldn't be real. They couldn't undo years of grief. "I held her," Sophia stammered, her voice breaking. "They told me. She was gone before I even woke up. They said she never drew a breath." "Tilit." Margaret's eyes brimmed with tears. "I lied." The words crashed down like a blow. Sophia stumbled back a step, shaking her head violently. "No, no, don't do this. Don't you dare tell me this now." Margaret coughed, her frail body convulsing against the sheets. "It was David. He didn't want children. He wasn't ready. He said a baby would ruin everything. His future, his career, his freedom. He came to me, begged me to make it disappear. I should have said no. I should have fought him. But I didn't. I used my position. I made sure the doctors believed the child was lost. We switched her with another baby who hadn't survived." Sophia pressed her hands to her temples as if she could block out the sound. The room spun. Images she had buried for years clawed their way back into her mind. The blinding lights of the operating room, the weightless emptiness in her arms when she awoke, the unbearable ache that never left her chest. "You stole her from me?" she whispered, her voice raw, hollow. Margaret's hand trembled as she reached for Sophia again. I thought I was helping my son. I thought if you believed the child was gone, you would leave quietly and he could build his life without being chained down. I was wrong. I was so wrong." Sophia's tears burned hot trails down her face. Rage and grief warred inside her chest, leaving her breathless. For years, she had lived with the crushing guilt of failure, believing she hadn't protected her child. That grief had destroyed her marriage, shattered her trust, and carved a hole in her soul that nothing could fill. And now she learned it had been a lie, a theft so cruel it defied comprehension. Where? The word was ripped from her throat, more demand than question. Margaret hesitated, shame twisting her features. "There's a notebook," she whispered. "Top drawer by the bed. First page. An address. She was given to a family, wealthy, respectable. They raised her as their own." Sophia lunged for the drawer, her hand shaking as she yanked it open. The small leather notebook slid into her palm, its pages worn from years of use. She tore the first one free, her eyes locking on the scrawled address. Bellevue, a mansion tucked away in one of Seattle's most exclusive neighborhoods. Her breath hitched. So close after all this time. Margaret's voice broke again. "He's powerful, influential. He won't let her go easily. You'll never win against him." Sophia turned, the slip of paper clutched so tightly it crumpled in her fist. Her tears had dried, replaced by something sharper, something that burned with fury and desperate resolve. "You don't get to tell me what I can or can't do," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You don't get to take her from me twice." Margaret sagged against the pillows, her eyes closing as if the confession had drained the last of her strength. "I'm sorry, Sophia. God forgive me. I don't know if you ever will." But Sophia was no longer listening. She couldn't. Her heart pounded with a single thought, a singular purpose: to see her child. She shoved the notebook into her bag and stumbled out of the room, her steps quickening as the fluorescent lights blurred overhead. Nurses glanced up as she passed, but no one stopped her. The hospital's glass doors slid open with a hiss, and the cold night air rushed in, mingling with the smell of rain. Seattle's streets glistened under the downpour, neon signs reflecting in puddles. Sophia slid into her car, her hands gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles whitened. She glanced once more at the address, blurred by her tears, then shoved it onto the passenger seat. The engine roared to life. For years, she had lived with the agony of loss. Tonight, for the first time, there was something else, hope, raw and dangerous, thrumming through her veins. And so, in the heart of a rain-soaked city, Sophia drove into the night, determined to find the daughter who had never truly been lost. The drive across the I-90 bridge was a blur of rain and headlights. Sophia's eyes burned from exhaustion, but adrenaline kept her foot pressed firmly to the gas. The wipers beat back the storm in frantic strokes, revealing fleeting glimpses of Mercer Island's quiet streets. Mansions lined the waterfront, their windows glowing like lanterns against the black sky. Each passing house twisted her gut tighter. Somewhere behind those walls was a child with her blood, her smile, her laugh. When she pulled into the cul-de-sac, the GPS announced the address in a flat voice, as though this were just another delivery, another errand. But Sophia knew better. The estate rose before her, a towering structure of glass and stone, trimmed in ivy and framed by iron gates. Its immaculate lawn gleamed even in the downpour. She sat motionless for a moment, her breath shallow, the paper with the address crumpled in her fist. From the side of the house, faint and clear even over the patter of rain, came a child's voice, a song simple, off-key but pure. Sophia's heart lurched violently against her ribs. She didn't need to see the child. She knew. Mothers always know. She pressed a trembling hand to the gate intercom, unsure of what she would say. Before she could form a thought, a sensor clicked and the gates swung inward with silent efficiency. Her pulse thundered as she walked up the long path, each step heavier than the last. The front door opened before she reached it. Standing there was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair slicked back from the rain. His expression was wary but polite, his hand braced on the frame as though ready to close it at any moment. "Can I help you?" His voice carried the clipped courtesy of someone used to handling strangers. Sophia swallowed hard. Words tangled in her throat, but she forced them out. I need to see James Whitman." "I'm James." His eyes flickered over her, taking in the soaked jacket, the drawn face, the way she clutched a slip of paper as though it were lifeline. "If you're here about the nanny position, you should have scheduled through the agency." She blinked, the words barely registered. "Nanny position?" He frowned, confusion knitting his brow. "Yes, we posted an opening last week." "Are you not? I'm not here for a job." Her voice cracked, but she steadied it with sheer will. "I'm here for my daughter." For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Rain pounded on the roof. Thunder rolled across the sound, but in the foyer everything was frozen. James's face went pale, his jaw clenched, and the easy civility in his voice vanished. "What did you just say?" "My daughter," Sophia repeated, each word trembling with desperation. "The little girl in this house, she's mine. She was stolen from me the night she was born." James's entire frame stiffened. His hand gripped the door tighter, the muscles in his jaw shifting as if he were holding back a surge of anger. "This is insane. I don't know who you are, but if you think you can come here in the middle of the night and I'm telling the truth," she cut in, her voice sharp, pleading. "They told me my baby died during delivery, but she didn't. She was taken, and she's here. She's here with you." For a split second, something flickered in his eyes. Fear, maybe recognition, but it vanished behind a hardened stare. "You need to leave. Now, before I call security." Sophia's throat closed, panic rising like floodwater. She could hear the child's voice again, lilting faintly from somewhere deeper inside the house. It ripped at her, urged her forward. "I'm not here to take her from you," she whispered, her tears hot and relentless. "I just need you to listen. Please, just listen." James hesitated, torn between slamming the door and the unmistakable anguish in the woman's face. Something in her eyes, something raw and broken, made him pause. His voice was low, strained. "If you're lying, if this is some twisted scheme, I'm not," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I'll explain everything. I'll show you proof. But don't shut me out. Not tonight." For a long moment, only the storm answered. Finally, James stepped back, his expression tight, conflicted. "Come inside," he said, his voice clipped. "I'll hear what you have to say. But understand, if you're here to threaten the only family I have left, I won't hesitate to end this conversation." Sophia nodded, her chest heaving, relief flooding through her despite the tension. She crossed the threshold, dripping rain onto the polished hardwood, and the door shut heavily behind her. Inside, warmth radiated from the lights, from the faint scent of lavender and polished wood. Somewhere down the hall, the soft melody of a child's song continued, pulling at Sophia's soul. For the first time in years, she was close, so painfully close, to the daughter she had lost. The foyer was warm, but the tension inside it chilled Sophia to the bone. James Whitman led her down a wide hallway, his shoulders rigid, every movement deliberate. He stopped in the kitchen, a polished space of marble counters and chrome fixtures. He gestured for her to sit at the table. She obeyed, though her legs trembled so violently she had to grip the chair to steady herself. James poured 2 cups of tea, his expression unreadable as steam curled between them. He set 1 cup in front of her, but didn't sit right away. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, studying her like she was both an intruder and a mystery he hadn't yet solved. "You claim the little girl here is yours," he said finally. His voice was calm, but beneath it ran a current of steel. "Before you spin another word, you need to hear my side." Sophia nodded quickly, her throat dry. James exhaled, the sound heavy with memory. "My wife and I tried for years. We went to specialists, clinics, spent every penny we had on treatments. Nothing worked. The doctors told us the truth eventually. She would never carry a child." His jaw tightened. It broke her, and it nearly broke us. He moved toward the table, finally sitting opposite her. His hands cradled his cup, though he didn't drink. His gaze softened slightly as he spoke again. Then, one night, the hospital called. They said a newborn had been abandoned. Healthy. No family willing to claim her. They asked if we'd consider adoption. We didn't hesitate. We thought it was a miracle, an answer to all those prayers we thought went unheard. Sophia's heart clenched. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, forcing herself not to speak. Not yet. James's eyes grew distant, fixed on a memory only he could see. From the moment we brought her home, the house changed. Laughter, late-night cries, bottles at 3 a.m. I'd never known chaos could feel like joy. My wife glowed in a way I hadn't seen in years. For the first time, she felt whole. His voice faltered, and then, 3 years later, she was gone. A heart attack. Sudden. I was left with a toddler who kept asking when Mommy would come back from heaven. The words cracked the air like a whip. Sophia bit the inside of her cheek, her vision blurring. She wanted to scream, to demand her daughter back that very second. But she forced herself to stay still. James set his cup down, his gaze steady once more. That little girl is everything I have. She's my world. If you think I'll just hand her over to a stranger who shows up in the rain with a story about stolen babies, you're mistaken. Sophia's breath came quick, her chest burning with grief and rage. She turned her head slightly, and that's when she saw it. Through a pane of frosted glass leading to the family room, a small figure darting past. Light brown hair pulled into a loose braid, humming to herself as she carried a doll in her arms. Her heart stopped. Every instinct screamed at her to rise, to burst into that room, to gather the child into her arms and never let go. But she gripped the chair tighter, nails digging into the wood. She couldn't terrify the girl, couldn't let this moment unravel into chaos. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I don't want to rip her away from you," she whispered. "I know what she means to you, but she's mine, James. She was stolen from me, and if you won't believe me now, then let me prove it. Let me stay close enough to care for her, to show you who I am. Please, let me be her nanny." The words hung in the kitchen, heavy and fragile all at once. James's face betrayed nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. For the first time that night, he seemed uncertain, caught between his fear of losing everything and the raw desperation of the woman across from him. James sat in silence for a long moment, his fingers pressed against the rim of his teacup. The rain outside had softened to a steady drizzle, but inside the kitchen the tension only thickened. He studied Sophia with a gaze that seemed to weigh every breath she took. "If what you're saying is true," he began carefully, "then you're not just some woman off the street. But if it isn't, if this is some scheme, then you're dangerous to my daughter." Sophia shook her head quickly, tears stinging her eyes. "I'm not here to hurt her. I swear it. I just need to be near her. I need a chance to prove it." James leaned back, his jaw tightening. "Then you'll agree to conditions. Strict ones." She nodded without hesitation. "Anything." He straightened in his chair, his voice gaining the sharp edge of a man used to making binding decisions. "First, a DNA test. If you're who you claim to be, the results will confirm it. I won't rely on stories or emotions. I need science, fact, documentation." Sophia's breath caught, but she nodded again. "Fine, whatever it takes." "Second," James continued, "a psychological evaluation. If you're going to be anywhere near her, I need to know you can control yourself, that you won't break down in front of her, won't confuse her with your emotions. You'll see a professional and follow through with their recommendations." Sophia swallowed hard, her stomach twisting. The idea of sitting in a sterile office, recounting her trauma to a stranger, felt unbearable. But one thought drowned the discomfort. Her daughter's face so close now within reach. "I'll do it," she whispered. James's eyes narrowed, measuring her resolve. "And finally a contract, a non-disclosure agreement. You will not tell her who you are, not until I decide she's ready. If you say a single word to her before that, this arrangement ends immediately. Do you understand me?" Sophia's chest tightened. The demand was cruel, yet logical. Revealing the truth, without preparation, could shatter the child's world. Slowly, she lowered her gaze and whispered, "I understand." "Good." James exhaled, his shoulders dropping slightly as though a verdict had been passed. "If you agree to those terms, I'll give you a trial run. Part-time at first. You'll help with the house, spend time with her, but always under my supervision. If she warms to you, we'll expand from there." Sophia closed her eyes, tears slipping free. It wasn't the reunion she dreamed of. She couldn't rush into the room, scoop her daughter into her arms, and claim the years stolen from them. But it was a beginning, a fragile, tentative beginning. "I'll sign whatever you want," she said. The next week was a blur of appointments and paperwork. The DNA swab was quick, sterile, over in seconds, but Sophia's heart pounded for days afterward, waiting for confirmation of what she already knew. The psychological evaluation was harder. She sat in a softly lit office, her hands twisting in her lap as she spoke of loss, of betrayal, of the faint thread of hope pulling her forward. The therapist nodded, scribbling notes, before finally saying she was stable enough for caregiving. When James handed her the NDA, the document thick with legal language, she didn't bother reading it. She simply signed where he pointed, her hand trembling but determined. And so, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, Sophia Carter returned to the Whitman house, not as a mother reclaiming her child, but as a nanny hired to care for another man's daughter. James introduced her to Sophie as Miss Sophia, a kind woman who would help around the house. The little girl blinked up at her with wide, curious eyes. There was no recognition, not consciously, but she smiled shyly and reached for Sophia's hand, and in that instant the ache in Sophia's chest deepened and healed all at once. Her shifts were short at first, 3 afternoons a week. She cooked small meals, folded laundry, read picture books aloud in a careful, steady voice. Each time Sophie laughed, it was like sunlight cutting through fog. Each time she laid her head against Sophia's arm, the temptation to whisper the truth nearly overwhelmed her. But she remembered the contract, the conditions, the fragile trust she was building. Days blurred into weeks. Sophia learned the rhythm of the house, the way Sophie liked her apple slices peeled, the lullabies she hummed to herself before bed, the way James's voice softened when he said good night. Slowly, cautiously, she became part of the fabric of their lives. It wasn't everything. Not yet. But it was more than she had dared to dream just days ago. And it was enough to keep her going. By late spring, the arrangement had already shifted. What began as a few afternoons each week stretched into longer days, evenings that bled into bedtime routines. Sophia slipped into the household with such ease that even James, meticulous and guarded, found himself relying on her more than he'd ever intended. One evening, after Sophie had gone to bed, James lingered in the kitchen while Sophia wiped down the counters. His voice was low, matter-of-fact, but carried something unspoken. It doesn't make sense for you to keep coming and going. She's attached to you already. Moving you in would provide consistency. Sophia froze, the rag in her hand damp and trembling. Moving in, living under the same roof as her daughter, every morning, every night. She forced her voice steady. Are you sure? It's a big step. James's gaze was even, though softer than she was used to. It's practical, and she'll benefit from it. So will I. A week later, her belongings were neatly tucked into a guest room at the far end of the hall. The house seemed to exhale when she settled in, as though it had been waiting for her all along. She cooked breakfast, brewed coffee, folded laundry with the quiet efficiency of someone who knew the rhythm of care. At night, she read Sophie stories, her voice soothing as the child drifted to sleep with her head resting against Sophia's arm. But the hardest part was the silence, the way Sophia swallowed the word daughter, each time it burned at the edge of her tongue. She wanted nothing more than to call her by her true name, to whisper the truth into her ear as she tucked her in. Instead, she smiled and kept the secret buried, honoring the contract, honoring James's trust. The mansion itself became both sanctuary and torment. In the mornings, sunlight streamed through wide windows, spilling across polished floors where Sophie played with her dolls. Sophia would kneel beside her, listening intently as the little girl invented stories, her laughter filling spaces that had once been hollow. Every sound carved deeper into Sophia's heart. James, too, began to notice. He would pause in the doorway, watching Sophia braid Sophie's hair or guide her small hands across picture books. At first his expression was wary, protective, but as the months passed, that edge softened. He saw how Sophia steadied herself, never breaking down, never crossing the invisible line of disclosure. She was careful, measured, selfless. Sometimes, late in the afternoons, they walked together in the garden. Sophie would skip ahead, chasing butterflies across the lawn, while James and Sophia followed at a slower pace. Conversation came in fragments at first, the weather, chores, the logistics of school drop-offs. But soon the words deepened, slipping into personal territory. He told her about the day his wife died, how helpless he'd felt holding a sobbing child and realizing he had to become both parents overnight. His voice caught when he admitted how often he feared failing. Sophia listened, her own grief resonating like an echo. She shared how the years after her supposed loss had hollowed her out, how every child she passed on the street was a wound that refused to close. Her honesty carried no blame, only the raw weight of memory. In those moments, something shifted. They weren't adversaries bound by contracts and suspicion. They were two people scarred by loss, drawn together by the fragile miracle of a child. The change was subtle at first, a fleeting glance across the dinner table, a lingering pause at the end of a conversation. But Sophia felt it. James's eyes no longer carried only caution. They held curiosity, even admiration. One evening, after Sophie had fallen asleep, James stood in the doorway of the kitchen while Sophia dried the last dish. He didn't speak right away. His gaze lingered, steady, contemplative. Sophia turned, startled by the intensity of his look. "What is it?" she asked softly. He shook his head, almost to himself. "Nothing. Just you're good for her. And for this house." It was the first time his voice carried warmth instead of guarded civility. The words settled over Sophia like a fragile promise, one she dared not trust, but couldn't help hoping might grow into something more. The summer air in Seattle carried the scent of wet earth and blooming hydrangeas. By now, Sophia's days in the Whitman house had settled into a rhythm so natural it was as if she had always belonged there. Every morning, she rose before the sun, preparing Sophie's lunch in a neat little box. Apple slices without skins, peanut butter sandwiches cut into triangles, and a note folded small enough to slip under the napkin. When she drove Sophie to school, the little girl chattered from the back seat, her words tumbling over one another, eager to share every thought. Sophia listened with the patience of someone who could never get enough, smiling at each story, memorizing each expression. When she dropped her off at the school gates, Sophie always turned back for a final wave, her braid swinging, her smile bright. Those brief moments carved themselves deep into Sophia's memory, treasures she hoarded silently. In the afternoons, Sophia sat with her at the kitchen table, tracing letters across lined paper. Sophie's small fingers clutched her pencil, her tongue poking out in concentration. "Like this, sweetheart," Sophia said softly, guiding her hand to form the curve of an S. The child's laughter bubbled when she succeeded, and Sophia felt pride swell inside her, mingling with sorrow for the years she had missed. James often stood in the doorway, unseen, watching. He never interrupted, but his eyes followed the way Sophia's patience wrapped around the child like sunlight. Slowly, the suspicion that had once sharpened his gaze gave way to something gentler. Respect, gratitude, and something else he didn't dare name. As weeks turned into months, the walls between them continued to thin. Dinner conversations stretched longer, no longer confined to schedules and chores. James spoke of his work, the pressures of managing his business, and the constant weight of responsibility. Sophia shared stories from the hospital, moments of joy and heartbreak she carried home from her patients. She was careful not to burden him with too much, but each word pulled them closer into the same orbit. One night, while Sophie was asleep, James poured them both a glass of wine. They sat on the porch, the rain a faint whisper against the roof. "You've changed this house," he admitted quietly. "It used to feel heavy, empty. Since you came, it doesn't anymore." Sophia looked at him, startled by the vulnerability in his tone. She wanted to tell him why, because she wasn't just a nanny, because the child was her flesh and blood. But the contract's shadow hung heavy, silencing her. So she only said, "I'm glad I can help." Inside his study drawer, locked away, James kept the envelope with the DNA results. He had opened it weeks ago, hands trembling as the truth burned itself onto the page. A perfect match. Sophia was the girl's mother. He hadn't told her he knew. Not yet. He wanted to be sure of her stability, of her intentions, of whether revealing the truth would heal or harm. But every time he saw Sophia brush hair from Sophie's face or kiss her forehead goodnight, his certainty grew. The truth couldn't stay hidden forever. The mansion had become more than just a roof over their heads. It was a home in the making. Sophia filled its quiet corners with warmth, her humming in the kitchen, her laughter with Sophie in the garden, her gentle words echoing up the staircase. James felt the difference every day, though he rarely said it aloud. As autumn approached, Sophie grew restless with excitement over birthdays. She whispered plans to her father in hurried tones, glancing at Sophia to make sure she wasn't listening. James crouched beside her, nodding solemnly as the child's eyes shone with conspiratorial delight. One evening, when Sophia was folding laundry, she overheard them in the next room. Sophie's giggles, James's low murmur. She stepped closer, and the child's voice floated toward her. "We have to make it special, Daddy. She takes care of me all the time. I want her to feel happy like she makes me feel." Sophia's throat tightened. She pressed the towel to her chest, swallowing back tears. She didn't step inside, didn't let them know she'd heard. But in that moment, she understood. Whatever they were planning, it was for her. The air in the house shifted in the days that followed, charged with secret anticipation. Sophia noticed James watching her more often, his gaze softer, lingering. And though she couldn't name the hope blooming inside her, she carried it like a fragile flame. Her birthday was only days away, and without her knowing, James and Sophie were preparing the moment that would change everything. The night of her birthday arrived quietly, without fanfare, without the weight of past celebrations that had often left Sophia feeling hollow. She expected nothing, perhaps a simple greeting from James, a quick hug from Sophie before bedtime. But as she stepped into the dining room that evening, she stopped short. The long table was set not with grandeur, but with warmth. A single cake sat at the center, small and homemade, its frosting uneven, but carefully decorated with strawberries. Balloons floated gently in the corners, and on the sideboard a vase of fresh lilies, her favorite, brightened the room. Sophie stood beside the cake, her hands clasped behind her back, her face glowing with anticipation. James lingered nearby, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. "Happy birthday, Miss Sophia!" Sophie shouted, her voice ringing like bells. Sophia pressed a hand to her mouth, overcome. You did this for me?" Sophie nodded furiously, bouncing on her toes. "Daddy helped, but it was my idea. We wanted you to feel special." Her knees weakened. For years, birthdays had been reminders of loss, of the child she believed she'd never hold. And now here she was, standing in a room where her daughter's laughter filled the air. It was almost too much to bear. They lit the candles, and Sophie insisted on singing, her voice sweet and slightly off-key, James joining in with quiet harmony. When Sophia closed her eyes to make a wish, her heart whispered only one. "Let me keep this. Let me keep her." After the cake was cut and shared, Sophie darted away and returned clutching a small box wrapped in shiny paper. She held it out with both hands, her eyes wide and serious. "This is for you," she said. Sophia's fingers shook as she took it. She opened the lid slowly, revealing a delicate silver pendant shaped like a heart. Inside was a tiny engraving, "Forever." Her breath caught. "Sophie, it's beautiful!" The little girl looked down shyly, then raised her eyes with sudden boldness. "Daddy told me the truth," she said softly. "You're my mommy from heaven." The words pierced through Sophia like sunlight breaking storm clouds. For a heartbeat, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Tears welled and spilled unchecked down her cheeks. She fell to her knees, arms opening wide. Sophie rushed into them, her small body pressing close, her warmth searing into Sophia's soul. "My baby!" Sophia whispered, clutching her daughter as if she might vanish again. "My sweet, sweet girl. I love you so much." Sophie giggled through her own tears. "I love you too, Mommy." James stood a few feet away, his eyes glistening, his arms crossed loosely as though holding himself steady. He had known this moment would come, had prepared himself for it, but nothing could have braced him for the sight of mother and daughter reunited. The contract, the conditions, the walls he'd built, all of it seemed meaningless in the face of such truth. Sophia looked up at him through blurred vision. Gratitude, love, and disbelief swirled in her gaze. He stepped forward, resting a hand gently on Sophie's back, his other hand brushing Sophia's shoulder. The three of them held each other in a circle of quiet reverence. Then Sophie, ever innocent, tilted her head back and looked between them. "Mommy," she said with a mischievous grin, "will you marry Daddy?" Sophia froze, her lips parted, laughter breaking through her tears. James let out a startled breath, then chuckled, shaking his head. "That's not exactly how proposals usually go," he murmured. But Sophia, still cradling her daughter, began to laugh too, a deep, liberating sound that washed away years of sorrow. "Well," she said softly, "how could I possibly say no to the both of you?" Sophie squealed, hugging them tighter, while James's hand lingered on Sophia's, steady and sure. In that instant, words weren't needed. The bond between them had already taken root. Outside, rain tapped against the windows, steady and unending. But inside, the house glowed with warmth. Sophia held her daughter. James held them both. And together they stood in the hush of the night, a new family forged not by contracts or blood alone, but by love and the resilience of truth. For years, Sophia had carried grief like a shadow. Now, in the heart of a rain-soaked Seattle evening, she found something else. Justice that spoke in whispers, not in courts or accusations, but in the quiet return of what was once stolen. And as thunder rolled faintly in the distance, she knew that at last the storm had passed.
The world keeps turning, and with each turn comes a new story. When one door closes, another opens, leading us into a journey entirely different. Let us set aside the echoes of the tale just past and step together into a new realm where another destiny awaits to be told. And now I invite you to listen to the second story, a path of its own, unrelated to what came before, yet filled with mysteries and surprises meant only for those willing to journey onward with me.
I tucked the soft blanket around my daughter, Sophie, as she stirred slightly in her crib. Her tiny hand clenched and unclenched before settling back into peaceful sleep. For a moment, the world felt quiet, safe. That feeling was rare these days, but whenever I looked at her, I felt grounded again, like I had something worth fighting for. Sophie had just turned 1, and every day I still marveled at how small she was and how much she had changed my life. When I first learned I was pregnant, I didn't think much about what it would mean to raise a child. I thought about tiny shoes, giggles, bedtime stories. I thought about love. What I didn't think about was how heavy the responsibility would feel when it landed squarely on my shoulders. Back then, I wasn't worried about any of it. I had Jason. He had convinced me we were ready, more than ready, to start a family. I can still hear his voice. "Kids are the best motivator, Olivia. Once we have one, I'll step up. We'll do this together." I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Jason was the one who wanted a baby sooner rather than later. Me, I had thought maybe we should wait, find a better apartment, save some money, maybe even let me get established as a teacher first. But Jason brushed those concerns aside with an easy laugh and an arm wrapped around my waist. "Plenty of families start small. We'll make it work. Trust me, Liv, this is the perfect time." And I did trust him. I trusted him with everything. Looking back now, I realize how much I longed for a family because of how I grew up. My mom passed away when I was born, and my dad eventually remarried. His new wife, Margaret, tried at first, but after having children of her own, her attention shifted entirely to them. I became the extra, the one asked to watch over her kids, to clean up, to step aside when she needed space. My father didn't see it, or maybe he didn't want to. Either way, I learned early on how it felt to be unnecessary in your own home. Maybe that's why Jason's promises meant so much to me. He made me feel wanted, chosen. I wanted a home where I was at the center of someone's love, where my child would grow up knowing they were cherished, not pushed to the side. As I stood there that night, watching Sophie breathe softly, I thought about how naive I had been, how quickly dreams could crumble. But I also thought about how strong I had become since those dreams fell apart. Sophie didn't know any of it yet. She just knew I was her mom and I was there. That had to be enough for now. Growing up, I never really had what people call a normal family. My earliest memories are of my dad rushing out the door to work and me sitting at the kitchen table, watching the clock and waiting for someone to come home. My mom wasn't there, she never was. She died the day I was born, leaving behind nothing but a few photographs and the smell of her old perfume that lingered on one of her scarves. My dad did the best he could, but it was obvious he was drowning. That's when Margaret came into the picture. At first, she was warm and friendly, the kind of woman who seemed to genuinely enjoy the idea of having a little girl around. She brushed my hair, bought me dresses, took me on walks to the park. For a while, I thought maybe this was it. Maybe I finally had a mom. But everything shifted when she had kids of her own. First came a little sister, then a baby brother. I wanted to be happy for them, and I was. But overnight, I went from feeling included to feeling like a babysitter. Margaret was all about her own children, and my dad, well, he was too tired to notice much of anything. I became the one who picked up toys, washed dishes, and took my siblings to the park, not because I was asked, but because I knew no one else would. What I really wanted was so simple. Someone to look at me and see me. I wanted a hug that wasn't distracted or hurried, a word of encouragement that wasn't an afterthought. But most days I felt invisible, like an extra piece of furniture in my own home. So I started dreaming of escape. By the time I was 16, I knew I wouldn't stay there a day longer than I had to. I buried myself in schoolwork, took on part-time jobs, and mapped out a future where I'd never have to feel like a burden again. That's probably why Jason's attention hit me so hard when I met him later. He made me feel chosen in a way I had never experienced before. When he said, "You're all I need, Liv. We'll have our own place, our own life, our own family," I believed him with everything I had. Looking back, I realized I was carrying that little girl inside me, the one who just wanted a home filled with love and safety, and I thought Jason was the answer. I thought loving him and building a family together would erase that empty feeling from my childhood. I didn't realize then how wrong I was, how dangerous it can be to pour your whole heart into someone without making sure they're ready to hold it. By the time I turned 18, I was packed and gone. I left that house with nothing but 2 suitcases, a scholarship to a teaching program, and a determination that I would never again feel like the extra piece of someone else's life. Sarasota, Florida, became my safe haven, far enough away to breathe, but still within a day's drive if I ever needed to look back. Not that I wanted to. College was tough, but I loved it. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who didn't know me as the stepkid, people who saw me for who I was and what I could become. I worked evenings at a small bookstore, spent my nights in the library, and convinced myself that I was building the kind of future I'd always wanted. A teaching degree, a career shaping little minds, and maybe one day, a home where love wasn't conditional. When I graduated, reality hit fast. Teaching jobs were scarce, and no one wanted to hire someone fresh out of college with no experience. Bills were piling up. So I took a job at an outdoor clothing store in a strip mall, not glamorous, but paid the rent for a tiny apartment I could finally call my own. It was at that job that I met Jason. It was late one evening, and I was wrestling with a massive box of winter jackets that needed to be hauled to the back storage area. I could barely get the thing off the ground when I heard a voice behind me. "Whoa, there, you planning to carry that yourself?" I turned and saw him, tall, broad-shouldered, with messy brown hair and the kind of smile that made you feel like you'd known him for years. Without waiting for an answer, he grabbed the box like it weighed nothing and carried it straight to the back. "Thanks," I said, brushing a strand of hair from my face, probably looking completely disheveled. No problem, he replied, flashing that easy grin. I'm Jason, HVAC technician by day, hero by night. I laughed despite myself. There was something warm about him, something familiar in the way he spoke. Over the next few weeks, he kept stopping by, sometimes to buy something small, other times just to say hello. Before long, we were getting coffee after my shifts, and he was telling me about his dreams. Starting his own business, building a home, having kids. You deserve more than working yourself to the bone in a place like this, he said one night, brushing his thumb over my knuckles. You deserve someone who's going to take care of you, someone like me. For a girl who had spent her entire childhood feeling overlooked, those words were intoxicating. Jason made me feel seen, chosen, even cherished. Within months, we were inseparable. He moved into my apartment, just for a while, he said, but soon his toothbrush and spare clothes turned into an entire dresser. At the time, it felt like my life was finally falling into place. I had a man who said he wanted a family as much as I did, and I believed we were building one together. But I couldn't have known then how quickly dreams like that can unravel. Jason proposed on a rainy Thursday evening, completely out of the blue. He'd had another argument with his mom earlier that day, something about how he needed to grow up and take responsibility for his life. I still remember him storming into our apartment, dropping his keys on the counter and blurting out, "Let's get married, Liv. Right now. Let's show everyone we're serious." It wasn't the dreamy proposal I had imagined as a little girl. But at the time, I didn't care. Jason said he wanted me, and after years of feeling unwanted, that was enough. We skipped the big wedding and opted for something simple. A courthouse ceremony, a cheap dinner afterward, and a couple of selfies we sent to friends. I didn't mind. For me, the marriage was the celebration, not the event. What I wanted was a home, a family, someone who would look at me and see a future. But then there was Margaret. Jason had warned me about her. She's particular. She likes things done her way. Don't take it personally. I tried not to, but from the moment I met her, I felt like I was standing in front of a judge, not a future mother-in-law. Margaret had this way of looking at me, polite but distant, as if she were measuring me and finding me lacking. She had spent decades as a hospital administrator, and it showed in everything from the way she carried herself to the clipped tone of her voice. She was the type of woman who didn't waste time on pleasantries and certainly didn't sugarcoat her opinions. "Olivia, is it?" she asked when Jason introduced me. Her eyes flicked over my thrift store dress and the scuffed flats I had worn to work earlier that day. "And what exactly do you do?" "I'm looking for a teaching position. In the meantime, I'm working retail." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Teaching? Noble, I suppose." Jason tried to smooth things over, laughing and hugging me close, but the tension in that room was like a thick fog. I told myself it didn't matter. Margaret didn't have to love me. She just had to respect that I was Jason's wife. For a while, things were tolerable. Margaret stayed in her lane, and I stayed in mine. Jason kept promising she'll come around, Liv. She just needs time. I wanted to believe him, so I kept trying, sending holiday cards, inviting her to dinner, making polite conversation. But I always left feeling like I was intruding on something that didn't belong to me. Still, I clung to the idea that love would fix everything. Jason said he wanted kids, and I thought once we had a baby, maybe Margaret would soften, maybe she'd see me as part of the family instead of some outsider. I didn't realize it then, but I was already setting myself up for heartbreak. I kept thinking that if I gave enough, smiled enough, tried hard enough, everything would eventually fall into place. But life doesn't work like that, and marriage certainly doesn't. It happened faster than I expected. One morning, I stared at a plastic stick in my trembling hands, the tiny pink lines staring back at me like a secret I hadn't been ready to share. Pregnant. I sat on the bathroom floor for almost an hour, wondering how I felt. Excited? Scared? Probably both. Jason had always talked about having kids, about how being a dad would make him step up his game and push him to do better. So when I told him, I expected him to scoop me up, twirl me around, maybe even cry a little. Instead, he blinked a few times, then grinned nervously. Wow, okay. That's sooner than I thought. But hey, it's great news. We'll make it work. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think this was the start of something beautiful. But almost immediately the cracks began to show. I had terrible morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoons, and working retail on my feet all day became unbearable. My doctor warned me about stress and heavy lifting, so I quit the job, assuming Jason and I would adjust. But without my paycheck, our finances sank fast. Jason said he would pick up extra shifts, but instead he started spending more time with his friends. He claimed he needed to blow off steam, which seemed to mean late nights at bars and long weekends where I barely saw him. I remember one evening, standing in front of the mirror, my belly just starting to show. I rested a hand on it and said softly, "Your dad loves you. He's just busy." I wanted to believe that. Jason came home that night smelling of beer, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes tired. He gave me a quick kiss on the cheek and said, "Man, Liv, you're really starting to show. Better slow down on the snacks, huh?" Then he laughed like it was just a joke. I laughed too, but later, in bed, I cried quietly so he wouldn't hear me. Margaret, surprisingly, called more often. She asked about doctor's appointments and even dropped off a few bags of groceries. It was strange. Her voice had lost some of that edge whenever she talked about her grandbaby. But Jason? He just seemed distant, like fatherhood was some vague idea he could think about later. By the time I reached my 3rd trimester, I had stopped expecting Jason to hold my hair back when I was sick or rub my aching feet. I learned to manage on my own, telling myself things would change once the baby arrived. He'd see her tiny face and something would click. He'd finally grow up, just like he promised. I was wrong, so painfully wrong. The day Sophie was born was both the most beautiful and the loneliest day of my life. Labor came early, 2 weeks before my due date, and Jason was nowhere to be found. He had told me he'd be home by 8, but midnight came and went and still no sign of him. I called 3 times before he finally picked up, his voice slurred and irritated. "What, Liv? I'm out with the guys. Can this wait?" "No, Jason, it can't. My water just broke." He stumbled into the hospital an hour later, reeking of alcohol and cheap cologne. I was too exhausted to fight, too focused on getting through the contractions, and when Sophie's tiny cry filled the room, all of it faded for a moment. I held her close, her soft skin warm against my chest, and whispered, "I've got you. I promise you'll never feel unwanted." Not like I did. Jason smiled for the pictures and even posted one on social media. Proud dad, blessed life. But that night, when I asked him to hold Sophie so I could sleep, he muttered something about being too tired and collapsed in the chair, snoring within minutes. Things didn't get better when we came home. Sophie cried a lot, colic, the pediatrician said, and I was up every 2 hours, rocking her while Jason slept in the other room with the door closed. He said he needed his rest for work. The weight of motherhood was heavy, but it wasn't just the sleepless nights. It was the emotional emptiness. I'd look at Jason and see a man who had begged me to start a family, only to vanish when reality hit. He'd disappear for long stretches, claiming overtime. But his stories didn't add up. Too many nights out, too many excuses. One evening, I called him, hoping he'd pick up diapers on his way home. A woman's voice answered his phone. She laughed softly before saying hello. My stomach dropped. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. There was silence, then the line went dead. Jason came home hours later, smelling like perfume that wasn't mine. He didn't even bother lying. "Her name's Bianca," he said flatly. "She understands me, Liv. I think I love her." I stood there, clutching Sophie to my chest, unable to process what I was hearing. He wasn't even apologetic. He was free. The next day, Jason packed a bag and left. No fight, no begging, just a quick, "You'll be fine. You're strong." And just like that, I was alone with a newborn, an empty bank account, and a heart that felt shattered beyond repair. For a while, I thought I wouldn't make it. But in those dark moments, holding Sophie close, I whispered to her again and again, "I'm not going to let this break me. I promise." I didn't expect to see Margaret standing at my door 2 weeks after Jason left. We hadn't spoken much since Sophie was born, beyond the occasional polite phone call. She looked different that day, tired, thinner, like she'd been carrying something heavy of her own. "Can we talk?" she asked softly, holding a paper bag of groceries in one hand. I hesitated, unsure if this was going to be another lecture about fixing things with her son, but I stepped aside. She set the groceries on the counter, glanced at Sophie sleeping in her bassinet, and sighed. "You don't have to say anything," she said before I could speak. "I know what Jason did." Her eyes were glossy, but not with anger. There was shame there. "I told myself I raised him better than this, but I guess I didn't. And now you're paying the price." I didn't know how to respond. Margaret and I had never been close. I'd always felt like an outsider around her, like she was quietly judging me. Yet here she was, apologizing for her own son. "You and Sophie don't deserve this," she continued. "So, if you want, you can come stay with me, at least until you figure things out." For a moment, I almost said no. Pride has a way of convincing you that suffering alone is better than accepting help. But then I looked at Sophie, tiny, vulnerable, depending on me for everything, and I swallowed my pride. "Thank you," I whispered. Living with Margaret was strange at first. She had rules, routines, a structured way of running her home that felt rigid to me. But then I saw the small things, how she'd rock Sophie when my arms were too tired, how she'd make dinner and leave a plate out for me when I was late putting Sophie to sleep. Slowly, the walls between us began to fall. One night, Margaret shared something I hadn't expected. Her own story. Years ago, her husband had left her when Jason was just a toddler. "I know what it's like," she admitted quietly, "to hold her child and wonder how you're going to keep going. That's why I can't just watch you struggle." For the first time, I didn't see her as Jason's mother, but as a woman who had survived her own heartbreak. Her support didn't fix everything. Jason was still gone, the bills were still piling up, but it gave me breathing room. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Sophie and I wouldn't have to do this alone after all. Even with Margaret's help, I knew I couldn't stay under her roof forever. She never made me feel unwelcome. But there was a look in her eyes, soft, almost maternal, that reminded me she wanted me to find my own footing. I wanted that too. So, I started searching for work that would let me take care of Sophie while still paying the bills. Teaching jobs were scarce, and I couldn't afford daycare on a starting salary. One night, while scrolling through online listings, I found an ad looking for a patient, reliable nanny for a 4-year-old boy. Flexible hours, good pay. The job was for a boy named Ethan, whose mother had passed away 2 years earlier. His father, Daniel Carter, owned a chain of car dealerships in Sarasota. According to the ad, Ethan had struggled socially since losing his mom, rarely speaking to anyone outside his family. I hesitated at first. Taking Sophie with me to work wasn't exactly professional. But when I called the number, an older woman named Helen, the family's housekeeper, answered with warmth in her voice. "Bring her along," she said. "Mr. Carter is fine with that. He just wants someone who'll be kind to Ethan." The next day, I drove to their home, an elegant Mediterranean-style house tucked behind a line of palm trees. Ethan was curled up on the couch, clutching a small stuffed elephant. He glanced at me and Sophie, then buried his face in the toy. Helen gave me an encouraging nod. "He takes time," she whispered. I knelt down a few feet from him, letting Sophie wiggle on my lap. "Hi, Ethan," I said softly. "This is Sophie. She likes elephants, too." Sophie, as if on cue, reached for the stuffed toy, giggling. Ethan peeked out from behind it, and for the first time, I saw the corners of his mouth twitch upward, just a tiny, hesitant smile. Daniel walked in soon after. I had expected someone older, maybe stern and intimidating, but he wasn't like that at all. Tall, lean, and dressed in a simple polo and jeans, he looked more like someone you'd see coaching Little League than running a business empire. "You must be Olivia," he said, offering a hand. His voice was warm but tired, the kind of tired that comes from holding a family together on your own. "Thank you for coming." We talked about schedules, expectations, and his hopes for Ethan. "He's a great kid," Daniel said, glancing toward his son, "but he hasn't opened up to anyone since it happened. I just want him to laugh again." Something about the way he said it tugged at my chest. I knew that feeling all too well. Watching someone you love shut down because of pain you couldn't erase. From that day on, I became Ethan's nanny. At first, he barely spoke to me, communicating mostly with nods and shrugs. But Sophie had a way of breaking through walls. She'd toddle over, hand him blocks or picture books, and slowly Ethan began to engage. One-word answers at first, then small conversations. Daniel noticed. One evening, as I packed Sophie's diaper bag, he said, quietly, "Whatever you're doing, it's working." I haven't seen him smile like that in years. I smiled back, feeling something shift inside me. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't just surviving. I was helping someone else heal too. And in doing that, I felt myself beginning to heal as well. Working for Daniel started as just a way to pay the bills and keep Sophie with me. But it slowly became something much more. The Carter house, once quiet and heavy with unspoken grief, began to feel lighter. Ethan laughed more, especially when Sophie was around. They became inseparable, like they had known each other in another life. Daniel noticed too. He'd come home from work, loosen his tie, and stand in the doorway, watching his son and my daughter building block towers or playing with toy cars. There was always this soft expression on his face, one I recognized because I felt it too. Relief. Relief that maybe we weren't as broken as we thought. Our conversations grew longer. At first, we talked about Ethan's routines, meal plans, nap schedules. But gradually it shifted. We shared little things about our lives. My love for teaching, his passion for restoring vintage cars, the awkwardness of raising children alone. One evening, after I had put Sophie and Ethan down for a nap, Daniel invited me to sit on the back patio. The Florida sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of coral and gold. He handed me a glass of sweet tea and said, quietly, "I was scared to hire anyone, you know. I thought no one could understand what Ethan needed. But you get it. And you don't just help him. You help me too." I didn't know what to say. Compliments like that always made me a little uncomfortable. But the warmth in his eyes told me it wasn't just polite gratitude. There was trust there, maybe even something deeper. The truth was, I had started to feel different too. For so long, I'd been stuck in survival mode, focusing only on diapers, bills, and how to keep my heart from breaking any further. But Daniel and Ethan, without even trying, reminded me what it felt like to breathe again, to laugh at silly things, to feel safe. Margaret noticed the change in me as well. One evening, she came to visit and watched as Daniel carried Sophie on his shoulders while Ethan tugged at my hand, begging me to come see the fort he built. Margaret smiled, a rare softness in her face. "You look happy, Olivia," she said. "I am," I admitted, for the first time in I don't even know how long. Daniel and I didn't rush anything. There were no big declarations or dramatic gestures. It was simple moments, him making dinner while I helped Ethan with a puzzle, us sharing a laugh over Sophie's messy attempt to feed herself, watching movies together after the kids were asleep. Those moments stitched something back together inside me that I didn't even realize was still broken. And Ethan, he blossomed. He started speaking more, laughing louder, even making friends at preschool. He would hug me goodbye when I left and once whispered, "Thank you for making Daddy smile again." I nearly cried right there. Somewhere along the way, we stopped being just two single parents trying to manage. We became a team and then, slowly, a family. I still had scars, memories of Jason's betrayal, of the nights I cried myself to sleep, thinking I'd failed at building a happy home. But every time I saw Sophie and Ethan curled up together on the couch, or Daniel smiling at me with that quiet gratitude in his eyes, I realized something important. Sometimes life doesn't give you the family you expect. It gives you the family you need. It had been nearly 2 years since Jason walked out of my life when my phone buzzed with his name on the screen. I stared at it for a long moment before answering. "Olivia," he said, his voice too casual for someone who had shattered our family. I was thinking maybe I could see Sophie. Catch up. Grab some coffee, like old times. Old times? I almost laughed, but something inside me, curiosity maybe, made me agree. "Fine," I said. "Tomorrow morning. The cafe on Main Street." I arrived deliberately late, dressed in a soft blue blouse and jeans, nothing flashy but polished. Daniel had offered to watch Sophie and Ethan, and Margaret had winked at me before I left. "Go remind him what he lost," she'd said quietly. Through the cafe window, I saw Jason sitting at a table, leaning back like he owned the place, phone in hand. He looked different, older maybe, more tired around the eyes, but the smug smile he gave when I walked in was the same. "Liv," he said, standing to pull me into a half hug I didn't return. "Wow, you look great." "I didn't expect. That's because you didn't know me anymore," I said, sliding into the chair opposite him. He blinked, but quickly covered it with a chuckle. "Fair enough. So, how's life? I saw your Facebook. Cute little family vibe going on. Is that guy the kid's soccer coach or something?" "He's my partner," I said evenly. "And yes, we're a family." Jason's smile faltered for just a second before he leaned back, crossing his arms. "Well, good for you, I guess. I just wanted to see Sophie, be a part of her life again." I studied him for a long moment. He was trying to look sincere, but I could see it, the restlessness in his eyes, the same look he used to have when he'd lie about working late. He didn't want to be a father. He wanted to feel like he hadn't failed. "Jason," I said, "finally, Sophie has a father. A real one. Someone who tucks her in every night, who shows up to her dance class and helps her build pillow forts. That man is Daniel. You gave up your place the day you walked out." His jaw tightened. "You don't have to be cruel, Olivia." "This isn't cruelty," I said softly. "It's clarity. You left us when we needed you the most. And I stopped waiting for you a long time ago." He tried to change the subject, launching into a story about his new job, his new apartment, even his new car. It was all noise to me. I realized then that I felt nothing. No anger, no longing, no sadness. Just closure. When he finally stood to leave, he gave a small shrug. "You look happy, Liv. Guess that's what matters." "It is," I said, standing too. "And I hope one day you figure out what that means for you." I walked out of the cafe into the Florida sunshine, the warm air wrapping around me like a promise. Daniel was waiting in the car across the street, Ethan and Sophie in the back seat waving wildly through the window. I slid in next to him, and he smiled, reaching for my hand. "How was it?" he asked. I looked at our kids in the back, Sophie laughing as Ethan made faces at her. "Exactly what I needed," I said. As we drove away, I thought about how far I'd come, from the girl who once begged for love from the wrong person to the woman who had built a life filled with it. Jason had been a chapter, one that hurt to read but taught me more than I could have imagined. And now, I was free. That evening, we all sat on the patio as the sky turned orange and pink. Margaret joined us with a plate of homemade cookies, settling into her chair with a content sigh. Daniel wrapped an arm around my shoulders as Ethan and Sophie chased fireflies in the yard. For the first time in years, my heart was quiet. Not because life was perfect, nothing ever is, but because I was exactly where I was meant to be. Sometimes life takes everything you thought you wanted, burns it to the ground, and hands you something better. And if I've learned anything, it's this. Heartbreak doesn't define you. What you do after does. And I chose love. I chose family. Ich chose me.